Imagine this. You're about to marry the wrong person, and the right person walks in at the exact wrong moment. Kang Min-jae built an empire on fear, loyalty, and silence. 14 years ago, he let the only woman he ever loved disappear. He told himself it was better that way, cleaner, safer. He was wrong. Because tonight, in a room full of the most dangerous people in Houston, she just walked back in, and she didn't come alone. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The suit cost $11,000. Min-jae knew this because his tailor, a nervous Korean man named Pyo, who operated out of a Midtown Houston suite on the 31st floor and never asked questions, had told him so with visible pride while pressing the final seam against his left shoulder. Charcoal, Italian wool, cut so precisely that it seemed less like fabric and more like a second skin grown specifically for a man who had spent 20 years making other men uncomfortable just by entering a room. Min-jae had nodded, said nothing, and tipped Pyo $300 in cash the way he always did. Not out of generosity, but out of the particular brand of control that came from making people feel grateful before they even considered whether they ought to be afraid. That was the trick his father had taught him before his father's enemies put a bullet in him on a rainy Tuesday outside a Seoul parking garage. Keep them grateful. Gratitude is cheaper than loyalty and lasts almost as long. Tonight, the suit hung on Kang Min-jae with the quiet authority of a man who had not needed to raise his voice in 11 years. The event space occupied the entire 44th floor of the Alderton Tower, a building Min-jae had financed through 4 shell companies and a construction firm that existed primarily as a tax instrument and secondarily as a place to store problems. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the room in the Houston skyline, city lights pressing outward into the dark July air like a sprawling electrical fire that never quite finished burning. The view was the kind that made wealthy men feel powerful and made powerful men feel something approaching peace. Min-jae felt neither. He stood near the east-facing windows with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched, watching the room the way he always watched rooms, not looking at anything directly, seeing everything peripherally. 230 guests, politicians, oil executives, a sitting federal judge he had helped put in place 3 years ago through contributions that existed only as rumors, members of 4 allied families, Korean, Vietnamese, and 2 branches of a Chicago operation that had moved south when the winters got expensive. Journalists who had been carefully pre-selected and were not permitted to record audio. His fiancée, Hana Shin, was across the room in a champagne-colored dress, accepting congratulations with the practiced warmth of a woman who had been raised to perform elegance under pressure. She was 32. She was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, deliberately, intentionally, with no accidental detail left to chance. Her father controlled the Shin Financial Group and 3 significant import ports. The engagement was good business. Min-jae had decided this 6 months ago and had not revisited the decision since, because revisiting decisions was not something he did. It implied uncertainty, and uncertainty was something he could not afford. Seo Dae-hyun appeared at his left elbow. Min-jae's underboss was 10 years younger, 4 inches shorter, and possessed of the kind of quiet lethality that made him seem at rest even when he was calculating. He wore his suit the same way he wore everything, like it was armor. "The Chon delegation is asking about the Western Port arrangement," Dae-hyun said. He did not look at Min-jae when he spoke. They were long past the need for direct eye contact. "Tell them the meeting is Thursday. Nothing gets discussed tonight." "They're pushing. Let them push." Min-jae finally took a sip of the scotch. It was a 25-year Macallan, and it tasted the way money tasted when you had too much of it, smooth and slightly hollow. "If they push hard enough, remind them what happened to the last group that confused a social occasion for a negotiation." Dae-hyun's expression did not change. "Understood. And find out why the elevator bank on the north side is still restricted to service personnel. We have guests coming up from the parking structure." "The Meridian security team." "I don't care what the Meridian security team decided. This is my building. Fix it." Dae-hyun moved away without a word, already reaching for his phone. Min-jae turned back to the window. 44 floors below, Houston breathed and sprawled and pulsed with the aggressive indifference of a city that had always been too large and too hot, and too ambitious to care very much about any individual human story. Min Jae had arrived here 9 years ago with a specific operational strategy and a reputation that moved through certain circles like weather. You felt it before you saw it, and by the time it reached you, the smart people had already adjusted. Houston had suited him. It was a city of extraction: oil, money, labor, information, and Min Jae was a man who understood extraction as a primary language. He had not expected to stay. He had not expected a great many things. There was a sound, not loud, barely a mechanical whisper above the jazz quartet and the low murmur of 200 conversations from the north elevator bank. The soft pneumatic exhale of doors opening. Min Jae didn't look. He was watching a light on the 58th floor of a building 3 blocks east blink twice and go dark, the way it did every night at precisely 9:40, and he was thinking about nothing in particular, which was the closest he came to peace. He was thinking about nothing. And then the room changed. It was not a sound. It was not a visible disruption. It was the quality of the silence that moved, the way 2 or 3 nearby conversations dropped their tempo, the way a woman near the canapé table shifted position to look toward the elevator bank with an expression that belonged to someone watching a minor accident unfold in slow motion. Min Jae felt it the way he always felt shifts in a room, through the skin, not the ears. Some animal alertness that 14 years of running an organization in 4 cities had sharpened to a near supernatural acuity. He turned. The elevator doors on the north bank were open. Standing inside the car was a woman. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress, structured at the shoulder, elegant in the way that came from knowing precisely who you were and having no particular need to announce it to anyone. Her hair was natural, pulled back from her face in a way that was more practical than styled, like someone who had arranged themselves for comfort and then accidentally looked extraordinary. She was holding a small clutch in both hands, which meant she had not expected to need her hands free, which meant she had not expected this room, these people, this particular building at all. Min Jae saw her face, and 14 years compressed into approximately 1/2 of 1 second. Zarya. Her name reached his mind before any other cognitive process could engage, before recognition, before disbelief, before the careful machinery of self-control that had taken him 2 decades to build could deploy itself. Just her name, arriving like something that had been sitting in a locked room for 14 years and had simply walked out when the door finally opened. Zarya Bennett. She was still the most arresting person he had ever encountered in a room, and he had spent considerable portions of his adult life in rooms where power arranged itself on human bodies like lighting. She was 40 now, or nearly 40, he calculated mechanically, helplessly. And there was a quality to her face that had not been there before. Not age exactly. Something earned. A settled gravity that sat in the line of her jaw and the directness of her eyes, which were currently moving around the room with the rapid, controlled assessment of a person who had just realized she was somewhere she had not intended to be and was determining her options. Then her eyes found him, and stopped. Min Jae did not move. He was quite certain he had stopped breathing. He was 43 years old, and he had survived 3 assassination attempts and negotiated across a table from men who operated with the casual menace of natural disasters. And standing at a 44th floor window in a suit that cost $11,000, he could not move. She did not look afraid. She looked like someone who had been braced for impact for 14 years and had just learned the impact was arriving now, tonight, in this room, wearing charcoal Italian wool. But it was not Zarya's expression that finally broke Min Jae from his paralysis. It was the movement behind her, 2 figures stepping out of the elevator car and into the edge of the room's light. Boys, teenagers, both of them tall, one nearly his own height already, which was a thought that arrived without his permission and hit him somewhere below the sternum. They had Zarya's eyes, that same specific quality of directness that she'd always had, the sense that they were looking at you and through you simultaneously. But there was something else in the structure of their faces, the set of their shoulders, the way the taller one stood, something Min Jae had only ever seen in mirrors. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The taller boy, he had to be 15, maybe 16, was scanning the room with the unhurried confidence of a young man who had been raised to be unintimidated by wealth and crowds. His gaze moved across the assembled guests without much interest, until it caught the sightlines of several people who were now openly staring at the elevator bank, and then he followed those sightlines to where they were pointing, and his gaze landed on Min Jae. He studied him for a long moment. Something moved across the boy's face, recognition without memory. The particular bewilderment of seeing something familiar in a context that makes no rational sense. Then the boy turned to Zarya. His voice was not quiet. "Mom." A pause. "Why is Dad marrying another woman?" The jazz quartet stopped playing. Not all at once. The bassist dropped out first, then the piano, and the trumpet caught itself mid-note and went silent. Or perhaps they kept playing and Min Jae simply lost the ability to hear them. What he was certain of was that the room, all 230 people in it, politicians and criminals, and the sitting federal judge he had helped elect, went silent in the particular way that rooms go silent when something private becomes spectacularly public. Hana Shin turned from her conversation by the bar. Her champagne-colored dress caught the light as she moved. Min Jae watched her face change. Zarya had gone very still. She had the look of a woman holding a live wire and calculating how to set it down without dying. She was not looking at Min Jae anymore. She was looking at her son with an expression of controlled catastrophe. The face of a parent who has planned for 1,000 disasters and somehow neglected this specific one. "Jaden," her voice was low and precise. "That is not... It looks like him." The boy, Jaden, pointed at the framed engagement announcement displayed near the east-facing windows. Min Jae's face beside Hana's, the text tasteful and minimal. "I've seen that face. You have a picture in the storage box in your closet, the one you think we don't know about." The younger boy, a step behind his brother, said nothing. He was watching Min Jae with an expression that was harder to read than his brother's. More careful, more contained. He looked like a person who had decided to see everything before deciding what to feel about any of it. Min Jae looked at Zarya. Zarya was finally looking at him. Her expression was the most complex thing he had ever been asked to read, and he had spent his adult life reading rooms and people and the spaces between words for information that could determine whether he walked out of a situation or didn't. It contained anger, obviously, a specific hard-edged anger that had been carried for a long time and had not softened with age. It contained something that might have been grief, or might have been relief, or might have been a species of emotion he didn't have a name for because he'd had no reason to develop one. It contained, underneath all of that, the specific exhaustion of someone who has been dreading a moment for 14 years and has now arrived at it and discovered that dread is not preparation. The scotch glass was still in his hand. He set it down on the nearest surface without looking, a waiter's tray as it happened, and the small sound of crystal meeting metal was the loudest thing in the room. Behind him, distantly, he was aware of Dae-hyun materializing at some intermediate position between the elevator bank and his location, moving with the careful purposefulness of a man who was not yet certain whether this was a security situation or something else entirely and was therefore covering both possibilities. Min Jae took one step forward. Zarya. Her name in his mouth felt like pulling something out of a wound. She lifted her chin. "We're at the wrong floor," she said. Her voice was perfectly controlled. "There's a charity auction on 42. We're going to the wrong floor." She reached back for Jaden's arm. He didn't move. "Mom," Jaden said. Quieter now, but not quiet enough. The room had not resumed. 230 people were collectively holding their breath. "Is he or isn't he?" Zarya said nothing. And in that silence, with the Houston skyline burning behind him and Hana Shin somewhere to his right going very still, Kang Min Jae got his first real look at the boy's face. At the particular angle of his jaw, the way he stood with his weight slightly forward, chin up, the same instinctive combat readiness that Min Jae had seen in his own body in mirrors for 43 years, and had always assumed was simply the way he was made. His chest did something he had no architecture to contain. "Clear the room," he said. His voice was quiet. It did not need to be loud. 230 people heard it the way people hear voices at that particular frequency, the one that removes any question of whether they have a choice. Dae-hyun began moving. "Min Jae." Hana's voice came from his right. He turned to look at her. Her face was very careful. Not performing hurt, not yet, because she was too intelligent for that, But there was something moving behind her eyes that he recognized as a woman rapidly reassessing the architecture of her near future. "What is Hana?" He said her name the same way he said everything when he needed to be very clear. "I need a few minutes." "You need a few—" She stopped. She was looking at the boys now, at the taller one's jaw, at something in his shoulders and the way he stood. She was smart. It was one of the reasons the arrangement had made sense, and she was looking at the boy with the particular focus of a person who is doing arithmetic they don't want the answer to. "Please," Min-jae said. It was not a word he used very often. Hana's expression shifted into something controlled and glacial and entirely her own. She picked up her champagne glass, turned, and walked toward the south lounge with the unhurried precision of a woman who was absolutely not going to give anyone the satisfaction of watching her feel anything she hadn't consented to feel. The room emptied in stages. Guests guided by Dae-hyun's people toward the elevators and the south terrace, the jazz quartet packing instruments with the professional speed of musicians who had worked private events long enough to know when something was happening that they should not be present for. Within 4 minutes, the 44th floor held 5 people: Min-jae, Zarya, the 2 boys, and Dae-hyun stationed at the elevator bank like a monument. Zarya turned to her sons. "Go with the gentleman by the elevator." She said it with a calm that Min-jae recognized as costing her something significant. "I need 5 minutes." Jaden looked between his mother and Min-jae with the uncompromising assessment of a teenager who had decided some time ago that adults did not automatically deserve deference. 5 minutes for what? "Jaden." Her voice sharpened just slightly. "Please." The younger boy touched his brother's arm, brief, wordless, and something passed between them in the way of people who have lived in close proximity long enough to develop a private language. Jaden exhaled through his nose. Both boys walked toward Dae-hyun, who positioned himself between them and the conversation with the calm competence of a man who had handled considerably more complicated situations and found this one refreshingly straightforward. Min-jae and Zarya stood on the 44th floor of his building, surrounded by the remnants of his engagement party, and looked at each other across 11 feet of marble flooring. "I didn't know this was your building," she said. "The invitation said Alderton Event Space. I didn't know." "I believe you." "I'm not here for—" She stopped. Reset. "I was invited by Candace Monroe. She's on the gala board. I didn't check the details carefully enough. I should have." "I know Candace." "I'm sure you do." There was an edge in that. Fine. He deserved edges. Min-jae studied her face. He wanted to catalog it. Every year he'd missed mapped in the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. The way she carried herself now, with a weight and sureness that had not been there at 25. She had been extraordinary then. There was no word for what she was now that wasn't inadequate. "The boys," he started. "Don't." "Zarya, not here." Her voice dropped. "Not in your party venue with your fiancé 40 feet away. Not like this." "She's not—" He stopped himself, recalibrated. "I ended it." Zarya stared at him. "You ended your engagement in the last 4 minutes." "Yes." "You can't just—" She pressed her lips together. "Min-jae, that is not— You cannot do that because I walked into a room. That's not how this works." "Tell me how it works then." He kept his voice even. "Because I am looking at 2 boys who have my face and 14 years I didn't know about, and I need you to tell me how this works." Something moved across her expression, a crack in the controlled surface, brief and quickly sealed. Her hands tightened on the clutch she was still holding. "This isn't the place." "You're right. It's not." He took 1 step toward her, just 1. He was aware of the geography between them, aware of how much territory 14 years occupied in physical space. "Give me a time and a place that works. I'll be there." "I'm not going to negotiate with you at your engagement party, Kang Min-jae." Former engagement party. "You don't know those boys." "I know that." The 2 words cost him something. "I know that, and I need you to understand that I understand that. And I'm not standing here trying to claim something I didn't earn. I'm standing here because I haven't breathed properly in the last 8 minutes, and the last woman I loved just walked into my building with two sons who have my chin, and I don't know what else to do except stand here and ask you to give me 1 hour of your time." Zarya was quiet for a long moment. The city burned through the windows behind her. "You said the last woman you loved," she said. He said nothing. Present tense would have been, "the woman I love." He said nothing. She studied him the way she'd always studied him, with that particular attention that had always made him feel simultaneously seen and stripped of every defense. "You look old," she said. "I am old." "You look tired." "I am tired." "Good." There was no cruelty in it, something else, something more complicated. "Call me tomorrow, afternoon. I'm not promising you anything." "I understand." She turned toward the elevator bank. Her sons were watching from beside Dae-hyun, Jaden with his arms crossed, the younger one with his hands in his pockets, and that careful measuring expression that Min-jae was already recognizing as a particular kind of intelligence that reminded him of something he couldn't quite name yet. "Zarya." She paused, did not turn all the way, offered him her profile. "What's his name?" Min-jae asked. "The younger one." A pause that lasted 3 full seconds. "Malik," she said. Then she walked to her son, said something low and efficient to Dae-hyun, who gave her his full professional courtesy. And all 3 of them stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Min-jae stood in the center of his emptied engagement party and breathed. After a moment, Dae-hyun came to stand beside him, with the particular quiet of a man delivering information he isn't sure the recipient is ready for. "The Shin delegation is going to want a conversation," Dae-hyun said. "I know." "Tonight or—" "Not tonight." Dae-hyun was quiet. "Pull everything on Zarya Bennett," Min-jae said. "Business filings, address, the whole picture. Do it through Kim. I want it clean, and I don't want it flagged anywhere." "And the engagement announcement?" Min-jae looked at the framed photograph near the east window, his own face looking back at him from beside a woman he'd been prepared to marry for strategic reasons, and called it a reasonable arrangement, and had not once, looked at that photograph and felt anything he would be embarrassed to feel in front of another person. "Take it down," he said. Dae-hyun removed it from the wall himself, tucked it under his arm with no expression whatsoever, and said nothing further. Min-jae walked to the window. 44 floors below, the street was a river of headlights and exhaust, and the indifferent momentum of a city that did not care what happened to any individual man at any individual height. Somewhere in that sprawl, Zarya Bennett was riding a car south or west or north, with 2 boys who had his face, toward a life he knew nothing about, that had been happening for 14 years while he was busy building an empire he had convinced himself was enough. He pressed one palm flat against the cold glass. 14 years. He'd spent them acquiring property, influence, territory, a reputation that moved through rooms before he did. He'd spent them becoming progressively more untouchable, which he'd told himself was the same as becoming safe, and he was 43 years old standing in $11,000 of Italian wool, and he was not safe. He was standing in the cooling wreckage of an engagement party with the sound of an elevator closing still in his ears, and he was not, had perhaps never been, anything close to safe. The number Dae-hyun delivered 30 minutes later was a Houston address. Zarya Bennett, sole proprietor of Bennett Creative Strategies, a mid-size marketing consultancy with 9 employees and a client roster that included 3 Fortune 500 regional offices and a nonprofit hospital network. She owned a property in the Memorial area, gated community, 4 bedrooms, purchased outright 6 years ago. No debt registered, no current partnerships, no record of any involvement with Min-jae's world in the past 14 years. She'd built herself a clean life, clean, quiet, completely her own. He'd built himself a kingdom, and he was standing alone in the middle of it, and the kingdom had never felt more hollow, and the clean, quiet life had walked into his building tonight with 2 boys who had his jaw and his posture and 14 years of a childhood he would never know. And Min-jae thought about his father dying in a parking garage on a rainy Tuesday, and he thought about how his father's last years had been the same algebra, power in every column, nothing in the one that mattered. He was still standing at the window when his phone rang. Blocked number. He didn't answer blocked numbers. Hadn't in 11 years. He let it ring. It rang again. He let it ring again. On the third call, he picked up. I need you to know something. Zaria's voice. Quiet. Not the controlled quiet of the 44th floor. A different quality. The quiet of a house where children were asleep. Before tomorrow. Before you make decisions based on tonight. All right. I didn't plan any of this. Tonight was an accident. I know that. And I don't... A pause. Something moving in the background. A television, maybe. The sound of a normal house at 11 at night. I don't want anything from you, Min Jae. I built something that doesn't need you. I need you to come into tomorrow with that understanding, or don't come at all. I understand. I don't think you do. Not unkind, just precise. You're in a world where when you want something, there are structures in place that help you get it. People, resources, leverage. I need to know that none of those things are going to... They won't. You don't know what I'm going to say. You're going to say you need this to stay outside my organization, outside my world. I won't bring any of it near you or the boys. He pressed the phone harder against his ear. I promise you that. Silence. Then, tomorrow, 1 o'clock. There's a coffee place on Westheimer called Carden and Lane, public, somewhere with people around. I'll be there. And come alone, Min Jae, I mean that. No Dae-hyun, no security team, no... Alone, he said. I'll come alone. She hung up. Min Jae lowered the phone. Dae-hyun had appeared again from wherever he'd been managing the evening's operational fallout. He looked at Min Jae's face and kept whatever he was thinking behind his eyes where it belonged. I need you to do something, Min Jae said. Tell me. Call Representative Park and Shin's chief of staff. He turned from the window. His reflection dissolved in the city light behind the glass. The engagement is finished. Park will want reassurance that the port arrangement isn't affected. Shin's people will want... He paused. Handle Shin's people however you need to handle them. Short of anything that creates a problem. Dae-hyun was quiet for a moment. Ending the engagement wasn't a financial decision. No. The Shin family will perceive it as an insult. Yes. That has operational implications. I know. Dae-hyun looked at him for a moment longer than his professional neutrality usually allowed. Then, what do you need me to do about Shin's people specifically? Make it right with money, Min Jae said. Whatever number it takes. I'll authorize whatever you think is appropriate. He walked toward the elevator bank. And Dae-hyun. Sir, thank you for tonight, the management of the room. Dae-hyun nodded once, precise and economical, and went back to his work. The elevator arrived. Min Jae stepped inside. The doors closed. He was alone in the elevator with his reflection. In the mirrored door panel, charcoal suit, tired face, the specific look of a man who has just watched the geometry of his life change shape in 45 minutes. Jaden, Malik, the boys. He pressed the ground floor button. Malik's eyes had followed him until the elevator doors had closed. That particular careful intelligence, not hostile, not warm, just watching. Cataloging. The way Min Jae himself watched rooms. The elevator descended. Min Jae thought, I have a son who watches rooms the way I watch rooms. And then, immediately after, I have a son. 2. The machinery of the elevator worked smoothly around him. The 44th floor receded. The lobby rose to meet him. Somewhere below, Houston kept moving, kept burning its electrical fire outward into the summer dark. He was not going to sleep tonight. He thought of Zaria's voice on the phone. I built something that doesn't need you. And he thought that in 14 years of managing an empire in 4 cities, he had never once heard anything that frightened him as efficiently as that sentence. Because she was right. She'd built something that didn't need him. And he had built something that he was beginning to understand. Standing in an elevator at 11:47 on a Tuesday night with the taste of a 25-year scotch he hadn't wanted still in his mouth was quite possibly worth a great deal less than he'd believed. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. Min Jae walked out of his building into the Houston heat and hailed his own car. No driver, no escort, just his own hands on his own wheel. And drove. He didn't know yet that Zaria Bennett had a box in the back of her bedroom closet. He didn't know what was in it. He didn't know that before the week was out, that box would be sitting open on her kitchen counter, and the contents would make everything he thought he understood about the last 14 years collapse under its own weight, like a structure built on the wrong foundation. He didn't know that he was about to discover the worst thing he had ever done. Worse than any deal, any threat, any decision made in any back room in any city, and that he had done it without knowing, which made it, somehow, the most unforgivable kind. He just drove, and somewhere across the city, in a house in Memorial with the lights mostly off, and two teenagers pretending to be asleep, Zaria Bennett sat at her kitchen counter and looked at her phone and breathed, slow and deliberate, the way a person breathes when they are deciding whether to open a door they have kept shut for 14 years. The door was already open. That was the problem. It had opened the moment the elevator doors had parted on the 44th floor of the Alderton Tower. And no matter what she decided tomorrow at Carden and Lane, no matter what words she chose or conditions she set or boundaries she drew with the careful precision she'd learned to apply to every part of her life that mattered, the door was open. And on the other side of it stood a man she had spent 14 years learning not to need. The coffee place on Westheimer was the kind of establishment that tried too hard to seem like it wasn't trying. Exposed brick, Edison bulbs hanging from raw wood beams, a chalkboard menu written in a font that cost someone a design degree. Carden and Lane. It had been open 3 years, and Min-jae had never been inside it, which was exactly why Zaria had chosen it. Neutral ground that was hers and not his. He arrived 7 minutes early. He'd told himself he wouldn't do that. He told himself he would arrive at 1 o'clock precisely, not early, which communicated eagerness, not late, which communicated disrespect, and he had driven to Westheimer at 12:40, found a parking structure 2 blocks east, and sat in his car for 5 minutes looking at his own hands on the steering wheel before deciding that sitting in a parking structure was more undignified than being 7 minutes early. He came alone. No Dae-hyun, no backup positioned in a secondary vehicle around the block, which had been Dae-hyun's strong suggestion and which Min-jae had declined with a finality that discouraged further discussion. Just Min-jae in dark jeans and a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearm, looking like a man who was trying to look like less than he was, which was the most he could offer. The cafe was half full. He took a corner table with sightlines to both the entrance and the service counter, which he did automatically, without thinking, the way he breathed. He ordered black coffee he didn't want and sat with it and watched the door. She arrived at 1:02, without the boys. She wore a white linen shirt and dark trousers and flat shoes, her hair down today, and she moved through the cafe with the efficient directness of a person who was here to accomplish something specific and had allocated exactly enough time for it. She spotted him immediately. He watched her eyes find him, watched the small, controlled adjustment her face made, and then she came to the table and sat across from him without greeting and set her bag on the chair beside her. A server appeared. She ordered an iced coffee without looking at the menu. They waited. The server left. "You look better than last night," she said. "I slept 4 hours." "I slept 3. She wrapped both hands around the water glass already on the table. Her nails were short, unpainted. Working hands. "The boys know you're their father. They've known for 2 years. He hadn't expected her to open with that. He kept his face even. "How?" Malik found the photograph, the one Jaden mentioned. She looked at the table, then back up. "I had a box. Old things. I thought it was... I should have gotten rid of it years ago, and I didn't. And Malik is the kind of child who notices things that aren't on the surface. He found it, and he brought it to me, and he asked me directly, 'Is this him? Is he our father?'" A pause. "He was 13. You can't lie to Malik and have him believe it. He was born knowing when something's off." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That yes, you were their father. That we had been together a long time ago. That you didn't know about them." She lifted her eyes to his fully. "I told them you didn't know. I want that on record." "I know you told them that. I need to hear that you believe it." "I believe it." He said it without hesitation, and he meant it without qualification. "You didn't disappear to punish me. You disappeared because you thought you had a reason. I know the difference." Her jaw worked slightly. Not agreement, not quite. Something being processed. "Jaden took it badly. Jaden is loud about everything. He was furious for about 6 months. At me, mostly. He had a whole phase where She stopped. Reconsidered how much of this she was giving him. "He's fine now. He's 17. He's a lot. And Malik is 15 and he asked me one question 2 years ago and accepted the answer and has not brought it up again until last night. She exhaled. Which doesn't mean he hasn't been thinking about it constantly. It means he decided to wait. Wait for what? I don't know. Him. She looked at him steadily. You. The server returned with her iced coffee. They both went quiet, with the automatic reflex of people who have things to say that are not for strangers. When the server left, Min-jae turned his cup in his hands. I want to ask you something, he said, and I need you to know that whatever the answer is, it doesn't change what I said last night, about being there, about ask. Why did you leave? The cafe sounds continued around them. The espresso machine, a conversation 3 tables over, the door opening and a blast of Houston heat briefly intruding before it sealed out. Zarya looked at him for a long time with an expression that was several things layered in order of depth. You know why, she said. I know what I was told. I'm asking you to say it. Her fingers tightened on the glass. The night before I left, you were on the phone with Seo Dae-hyun. She said the name with the practiced neutrality of someone who has said it to themselves many times in private. You didn't know I was in the hallway. You said... She stopped. Something moved across her face that she didn't fully suppress. You said that the situation was getting complicated, that you'd let it go too far, that a woman like her, like me, didn't fit into what you were building, that you would end it when the timing was right. Silence. And then you said, she continued, her voice very controlled now, that you weren't sure she'd understood what she was from the beginning, what the arrangement actually was. She looked at him directly. Your word, arrangement. Min-jae said nothing, because he remembered the call. The specific architecture of it arrived in full, the way certain memories do. Not gradually, but all at once. Every detail present and accounted for. Late 2010, early autumn, the apartment in Chicago before Houston. He'd been standing in the kitchen, Dae-hyun on the phone about something operational, something about the Yeon family and the pressure they were putting on the West Side arrangement, and Min-jae had been tired and cornered and had said things that were not about Zarya, had been about the operational optics of his personal life, at a moment when 2 rival operations were probing for weakness, and a serious relationship with a black woman in the specific world he occupied had been flagged by 3 separate advisors as a vector of vulnerability. He had said those things to Dae-hyun, and he had been wrong. Not just morally wrong, strategically wrong, because he had been looking at the wrong metric entirely. But the words were the words. That conversation, he said carefully, was about optics inside the organization. I was talking about perception, about what other people were saying. I know what I heard. I'm not arguing what you heard. He kept his voice even. I'm telling you what I meant, which was different, and which I should have been man enough to say to your face and wasn't. And I'm telling you that I was wrong, about the conversation and about the decision to have it instead of talking to you. He set his coffee down. That does not excuse what I said. There is no version of that where I wasn't saying something I should never have said. I'm telling you the context because you deserve the full picture, not because I want you to forgive it. Zarya looked at him for what felt like a very long time. I was pregnant, she said, when I heard that conversation. The cafe continued around them. I had taken the test that morning. I had told myself I was going to tell you that night. Her voice remained controlled, precise. The voice of a woman who has had years to arrange these facts into a shape she could carry. I'd stopped at a store on the way home, bought a few things, baby things, very small. I don't know what I thought, that you'd be surprised and then it would be okay, that you wanted what I wanted. She looked at the table, and then I stood in that hallway and listened to you describe me as an arrangement that had gone on too long. Min-jae's chest was doing something he had no control over. I left that night, she said. I called my cousin in Atlanta. I was on a plane by morning. I had planned to reach out, to tell you about the pregnancy. I sat in my cousin's apartment for 2 weeks telling myself I was going to call, and every time I picked up the phone, I heard that word again. She looked up. Her eyes were completely dry, which cost more than tears would have. Arrangement. Zarya, I'm not looking for an apology. Her voice sharpened. Not cruelty. Warning. I'm answering your question. You asked why I left. That's why. And I need you to understand that I have made a life that functions without that answer being resolved. And I have raised 2 boys who are healthy and smart and loved and who do not have a single deficit that you are necessary to fill. I need you to understand that before we go any further. I understand that. Say it like you mean it. You built something without me, he said. It's whole. You don't need me in it. I know that. He held her gaze. I'm asking to be let in anyway. The silence between them was different now, not emptier, denser. Something had shifted in its composition. The boys want to meet you, she said. Finally, like a door opening an inch. Separately from last night. Jaden has about 140 questions he's been storing, and he will absolutely ask all of them. Malik won't say much, but he'll be watching everything. I know, I saw that. You saw it in 40 seconds. He watches rooms, Minjae said. Same way I do. Zarya's expression moved in a direction he couldn't entirely read. Don't... She stopped. Don't what? Don't look for yourself in them yet. They're their own people first. He nodded. Slow. Understood. I know. She reached for her bag. I'll set something up. Low-key. Nothing that puts them in a position to perform or be overwhelmed. She pulled out a phone, looked at it briefly, put it away. This is going to be difficult, Minjae. I need you to know that. Not hostile, not a war, just genuinely, concretely hard. Because I have spent a long time building walls around my children, and I do not dismantle those on any timeline but theirs. Tell me the timeline. Theirs? She repeated. Not yours, not mine, not whatever the situation with your organization requires. She looked at him flatly. Are we clear on that? Yes. Then I'll call you. She stood. Give me a few days. Minjae stood too. Reflex, not performance. She was already moving toward the door with that efficient walk, the one that said she had a next thing after this, and the next thing was already organized. He sat back down. He watched the door close behind her. He sat in the cafe for another 20 minutes and drank his cold coffee and said nothing to anyone. Daehyun called at 3. Minjae answered on the first ring because avoiding Daehyun when Daehyun had information was like avoiding weather. Tell me. The Shin family has filed a formal complaint with the council. Daehyun's voice carried no editorial content. Representative Park is requesting an emergency sit-down. He says the optics of the engagement ending the way it did have created questions about organizational stability. Call it a mutual decision. They know it wasn't mutual, Minji. It doesn't matter what they know. It matters what's officially stated. He pressed 2 fingers to his temple. Schedule Park for Friday morning. Not here, the Galleria office. There's more. Daehyun paused in the specific way he paused when the more was the actual point of the call. The Yan family sent a representative to the Shin compound yesterday evening. Minjae went still. The Yan family. Chicago. The same operation that had been a pressure point 14 years ago in a phone call that had cost him everything, and whose name therefore landed in his chest like a specific weight. They operated in Houston's Eastern Corridor under a licensing arrangement that Minjae tolerated because disrupting it would cost more than it gained. They were also, and this was the relevant point, the family most likely to read instability in Minjae's operation as an invitation. Why? He said. Unknown, officially. Unofficially, our contact inside the Shin household says the conversation lasted 3 hours and involved documents. What kind of documents? Financial, port access. Minjae stood up from the cafe table, walked toward the door. The Houston heat received him at the threshold like a physical argument. Who authorized that meeting? No one on our end. It was arranged without us. So the Shins are shopping. Daehyun said nothing, which was confirmation. Minjae stood on the Westheimer sidewalk in the afternoon blast, 94 degrees of July pressing down from a sky that had the white-gray quality of air that had forgotten how to rain. He watched traffic. He thought about the Yeon family. He thought about the particular arithmetic of a situation in which he had canceled an engagement that had represented a financial and territorial alliance in front of 230 witnesses, and a woman from his past had walked in with two boys he hadn't known about, and now the family he'd insulted was in quiet conversation with his oldest structural enemy. He thought about Zaria saying, "Are we clear on that?" He thought about Malik in the elevator, the careful eyes. "Set up a meeting with the Yon representative," he said. "Not through the Shin channel, independently, directly." He started walking toward the parking structure. "I want to know what was offered before Friday. Can you get that?" "I can try." "Don't try, Daehyun. I'll get it. And pull together everything on the port access documents, everything we have on file." "That'll take until tomorrow." "Then I'll see it tomorrow." He reached the parking structure entrance. The shade inside was a physical relief. "One more thing. Sir, I need a background on the Bennett operation. Everything clean, no surveillance, no contact with her organization, nothing that would create a footprint she could trace back to us. I want financials, client base, physical security of her property." Silence on the line. "Dae-hyun, I'm here." A pause. "You want me to run a background on the mother of your sons. I want to understand her situation well enough to know whether my current problems represent a risk to her or to them." He walked to his car. "That is the only reason. I need to know whether keeping her near me puts her in the line of something." Daehyun was quiet for another 3 seconds, which was a long time for Daehyun. "Understood." Min-jae got in the car, set his phone on the seat. He drove east on Westheimer with the air conditioning maxed and his mind running 3 tracks simultaneously the way it always had. The way that had made him effective and had also, he was now understanding, made him someone it was very difficult to actually be close to. Track 1. The Yeon-Shin connection and what it meant for the organization's Eastern operations. Track 2. Zaria's voice saying arrangement with the particular deadness of someone repeating a word that had done damage at close range. Track 3. The one he could not suppress. A 15-year-old boy watching a room with ancient, careful eyes and deciding to wait for the right moment. He had 3 missed calls from his mother by the time he reached the highway. His mother, Kang Soo-yeon, lived in a Korean residential complex in Sugarland and had approximately 17 opinions about every decision Min-jae had made in the last 2 decades, and did not hesitate to share any of them, which was why he spoke to her on a rotating schedule designed to protect both their blood pressures. He called her back. She picked up on the first ring. "You ended your engagement on the news." "It was not on the news. 7 people from the community called me. That's the news." Her English was precise, accented, and was used exclusively when she wanted him to understand that she was making an effort to be clear. She switched to Korean. "Who was the woman with the children? I heard she was beautiful." "Where did you hear that?" "Park's wife called me." Min-jae exhaled through his nose. Of course she had. Park's wife ran an informal intelligence network that the CIA would have envied if it knew about it. "Her name is Zaria Bennett. We were together 14 years ago." A pause. "And the boys?" He said nothing. His mother made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a word. A sound of someone adding up a column of numbers and finding that the total, while unexpected, was internally consistent. 14 years, she said. "Yes." "You didn't know?" "No." Another pause. "Min-jae." Her voice dropped to the register she used for things that were genuinely serious. "Come to dinner Sunday." "I have Sunday," she said. "Bring whatever you need to bring. I will make miyok guk, and you will sit at my table and talk to your mother." He almost said no. Instead, "All right, Sunday." She hung up. He drove. By Thursday, the Yeon situation had clarified into something worse than he'd anticipated. The documents the Yeon representative had brought to the Shin compound included a proposal, detailed, operational, port-specific, for a renegotiated corridor agreement that would effectively route around Min-jae's licensing arrangement and give the Shin family's transport infrastructure direct access to the Yeon network. It was, in the language of his world, a bypass. It would not destroy his operation. It would not need to. It would simply make him less necessary, which in his world was a form of death conducted slowly enough that you felt each increment. He sat with Dae-hun in the Galleria office, a clean, anonymous space that officially belonged to a commercial real estate holding company. And they looked at the summary together across a table that held 2 laptops and a great deal of controlled tension. They moved fast, Min-jae said. They had this prepared before last night, Dae-hyun said. This proposal was built before the engagement ended. They were waiting for a fracture. And I gave them one. You gave them one. Min-jae looked at the documents. He thought about the word prepared. He thought about 14 years of careful construction and Zarya in a coffee shop saying the word arrangement like a verdict, and Malik in an elevator watching the room. He thought about what it would mean operationally to push back hard on the Yan family and what it would cost him in the specific currency of time and attention and the kind of concentrated focus that came from having nothing more important to attend to. And then he thought about what he was willing to spend that currency on. He looked up. What's our most aggressive counterposition? Lay it out. Dae-hyun laid it out. It was aggressive and it was available and it would work if Min-jae was willing to spend the next 3 months doing nothing else. Focused, locked in, the way he had locked in before, the way he was good at, the total commitment posture that had built everything he currently had at the cost of everything else. Min-jae listened. Dae-hyun finished. The office was quiet. I'm not going dark for 3 months, Min-jae said. Dae-hyun looked at him. I'm not going into operational lockdown. Min-jae kept his voice level. Find a middle position, something that stabilizes without requiring me to disappear. He pushed his chair back. There is something I have to do. It cannot wait 3 months. Min-jae. Dae-hyun rarely used his name without the honorific. When he did, it meant something. The Yan family does not negotiate with a distracted man. I know. This window is... I know. He stood. Find the middle position. He was in his car when Zarya called. He picked up immediately. Zarya, tomorrow, she said. 3 o'clock. There's a park off Memorial Drive and Congressman's Walk. There's a pavilion by the east entrance. Bring nothing that makes you look like what you are. A pause. They want to meet you, Min-jae. Both of them. That's their decision, not mine. I need you to be ready to answer questions you're not going to like. His hand tightened on the phone. I'll be there. And I need you to understand something before you come. Her voice shifted, lower, more deliberate. I have not told them the details of your work. They know you are a powerful and dangerous man. They are not naive children, but I have not confirmed specifics, and I need you to think very carefully about how much truth they can carry right now. What do you want me to tell them? I want you to tell them the truth. Just carefully, in amounts that don't... She stopped. He could hear her breathing. I need you to protect them. I will, he said, and he meant it with every cell in his body. I'll protect them. There was a pause on the line that felt like weather about to break. Zarya, he said her name carefully. The box. In your closet. The one Malik found. A long silence. What was in it? He said. Besides the photograph. Another silence. Longer. When she spoke, her voice had changed quality. Gone very quiet, very still, the way still water conceals depth. Why are you asking me that? Because Dae-hyun pulled your financials today. Clean, no footprint, just to assess whether you're safe from exposure through me. He paused. And I found something in your business and corporation documents from 14 years ago that I need you to explain. Complete silence. The registered agent for Bennett Creative Strategies, he said carefully, is listed as 1KM Jin. That's a holding company name I recognize, Zarya, because I created it in 2010 for the purpose of it. Stop, she said. The word came out with force. He stopped. You don't know what you found, she said. Her voice was unsteady now. Just barely, just enough. And that specific quality of barely contained alarm told him something he had not been prepared for. That whatever was in that box, whatever was in those incorporation documents, Zarya Bennett had been carrying a secret of her own for 14 years. And it was not small. Zarya. He kept his voice perfectly even because the alternative was the opposite of useful. Talk to me. She hung up. He called back. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. This time she answered,
Tomorrow, she said. Her voice had recovered its surface. 3 o'clock, be there. She disconnected.
Min-jae sat in his car in the Galleria parking structure with his phone in his hand and the information arranging itself in his mind with the cold precision that had served him for 20 years. And what it was arranging itself into was this. The woman he had spent 14 years without had built her clean, independent life using an infrastructure he did not remember creating for her, which meant someone had created it on his behalf, without his knowledge, for reasons he did not yet understand. And whoever had done that was still, based on the act of registration, maintaining it. He thought about Dae-hyun saying this proposal was built before the engagement ended. He thought about the Yeon-shin meeting and the documents that had been prepared in advance of the fracture they were waiting for. He thought about what it meant that the holding company KM Jin, a shell he'd used for one specific purpose in one specific year, appeared in the legal foundation of Zaria Bennett's business. Someone had been watching her. Someone connected to him had been watching her for 14 years. And tomorrow at 3 o'clock, he was going to sit across from his sons for the first time in their lives, and he was going to have to decide, in real time, with no preparation, with Malik's careful eyes on him and Jaden's questions coming like gunfire, how much of what he now suspected was true. Because if it was true, then the story of why Zaria had left was not the whole story, and the man who might know the rest of it was the same man Min-jae had trusted with every significant decision of his professional life, Seo Dae-hyun. He didn't sleep. He sat in the Galleria office until 2 in the morning with the incorporation documents spread across the table and a legal pad full of notations that kept arriving at the same conclusion, no matter how many times he rerouted the arithmetic. KM Jin Holdings. Registered 2010, Chicago. Dormant for 3 years. Reactivated in 2013 with a Houston address. Annual maintenance fees paid through an automated trust instrument he did not personally manage, which meant someone inside his organizational structure had set up the automation, which meant someone had made a decision about Zaria Bennett's financial infrastructure without telling him, and had maintained that decision across 14 years and 2 cities and had never once mentioned it. He wrote Dae-hyun's name in the center of the legal pad. He stared at it for a long time. Then he closed the pad, turned off the lights, and drove to the park. He arrived at Congressman's Walk at 2:45 in the morning and sat in his car in the empty lot and watched the pavilion by the east entrance exist in the sodium orange glow of the park lighting, and he thought about what it meant to accuse Seo Dae-hyun of something. Not the accusation itself, but the proof required before the accusation. In his world, you did not accuse without proof because the cost of a wrong accusation was the structural integrity of every loyalty beneath it. If Min-jae came at Dae-hyun wrong, he would fracture his own organization from the inside out at the precise moment the Yeon family was probing for exactly that fracture. So he needed to know first. He needed to know before 3 o'clock, or he needed to be able to sit across from his sons without knowing and keep that from his face. He drove home at 4, slept 2 hours, woke at 6 and called a man named Cha Bon-soo, who operated outside his immediate organizational structure, and who had worked independent security for 3 different family operations in the last decade, and who owed Min-jae a specific favor from a specific night in 2019 that neither of them had spoken about since. I need a full audit of KM Jin Holdings, Min-jae said. Every transaction, every maintenance payment, originating accounts, routing, everything. I need it by noon. That's 6 hours, Cha said. I know what time it is. A pause. Is this internal? Yes. Another pause that was longer and more weighted. Min-jae, see. If this is internal, you understand the... By noon, Min-jae said. Please. He hung up. At 11:47, Cha sent a file. Min-jae opened it at the kitchen counter of his apartment with black coffee going cold beside him, and the Houston morning pressing white and merciless through the windows. He read it in the way he read everything that mattered, completely, without skimming, without letting any individual item convince him of the conclusion before he had all of them. It took 19 minutes. When he finished, he set the phone face down on the counter and stood with both hands flat on the marble and breathed through his nose, slow and deliberate, the way his father had taught him to breathe when the impulse was violence, and violence was not yet the right instrument. The maintenance payments for KM Jin Holdings originated from a trust account registered to a Seo family holding vehicle. Not Dae-hyun's name.
It was never Dae-hyun's name, because Dae-hyun had not survived 20 years inside Min-jae's operation by being careless with his name. But the trust's registered address was a property in Sugarland that Min-jae had visited twice for organizational meetings, and whose address he recognized the way he recognized his own handwriting.
Dae-hyun had been funding Zaria Bennett's business infrastructure for 14 years.
Without telling him, Min-jae picked up the coffee, put it down without drinking, picked up his keys. He drove to Dae-hyun's house. Dae-hyun lived in a quiet street in the Meyerland area, modest by the standards of his position, which was itself information about who Dae-hyun was. Brick house, well-maintained garden, a car in the driveway that cost exactly as much as a man with legitimate business interests could justify. Min-jae pulled up, got out, walked to the front door and knocked. Dae-hyun answered in 30 seconds. He was dressed already. He was always dressed. And his face did what Dae-hyun's face always did when he was computing rapidly, which was absolutely nothing. He looked at Min-jae. He stepped back from the door. Min-jae walked inside. The house was clean and quiet. Dae-hyun's wife was not visible, likely already gone with their daughter, who attended a school in Bel Air. Min-jae walked to the kitchen table and sat down and put his phone on the table with the KM Jin audit document open and facing Dae-hyun. Dae-hyun looked at the screen. He sat down across from Min-jae. He said nothing. "Walk me through it," Min-jae said. His voice was very quiet. The particular quiet that people who knew him understood as the most dangerous register he possessed. "From the beginning. Leave nothing out." Dae-hyun looked at the table, then at Min-jae. His jaw moved slightly, not speaking, just the muscular arrangement of a man organizing something difficult. "It was 2010, he said. "The call. The one she overheard." Min-jae waited. "She called me the next day," Dae-hyun said, "before she left. She didn't call you. She called me. She said she was leaving and she wanted me to know so that you wouldn't spend resources looking for her. She said it was cleaner that way." His voice was entirely flat, factual. "She said she was pregnant." The kitchen was very quiet. "She asked me not to tell you," Dae-hyun continued. "She said that given what you had said on that call, the child would be better raised away from your world. She asked me to ensure you were not told, and she asked for nothing else." He paused. "I made the decision to structure support, without telling her and without telling you. The KM Jin vehicle was already dormant. I used it because it was untraceable to either of you directly." Min-jae looked at him for a long time. "You knew," Min-jae said. "For 14 years. You knew I had sons." "Yes. You sat across from me in 4 cities and at how many tables? Many tables. And you knew." Dae-hyun met his eyes. "Yes." The sound that came out of Min-jae was not loud. It was very small, actually. A compressed exhalation that was the vocal equivalent of something structural giving way under too much weight. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth, looked at the ceiling, looked back at Dae-hyun. "Why?" he said. It was a single syllable, and it carried 14 years in it. Dae-hyun was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, something shifted in his voice, still flat, still controlled, but underneath it the sound of a man who had made a decision a long time ago and had spent considerable time since then living inside its consequences. "Because you would have gone after her," he said. "You were not. In 2010, you were not the man who was going to walk into her life and make it better. The Yeon situation, the Chicago consolidation, the degree of exposure you were operating under. If you had known she was pregnant and she was gone, you would have found her. And finding her in that operational climate would have made her a target." He kept his gaze level. "I made a calculation." "You made a calculation," Min-jae repeated. "Yes. About my sons. About the safety of a woman and 2 unborn children in the specific context of your life at that time." A pause. "I was not wrong about the context." Min-jae stood up. He walked to the kitchen window. Outside, Dae-hyun's garden was trim and deliberate and entirely ordinary. The garden of a man who maintained the surface of things with great care. Min-jae looked at it without seeing it. "She didn't know," he said, "about the support structure." "No." The KM Jin vehicle was designed to appear as a standard small business investor instrument. She would have had no reason to investigate the origin. But she found it. You found it. She may have known something was structured around her business. She is not an unsophisticated woman, but she did not know the source. Dae-hyun paused. Until your call last night told her that you knew. Min-jae turned from the window. He looked at Dae-hyun with the full weight of 20 years between them. The decisions made together, the situations managed, the specific trust that was not friendship exactly, but was something that functioned like a spine inside everything they had built. He looked at the man who had known about Jaden and Malik from before their names existed and had decided, alone, in the particular silence of his own authority, what to do with that knowledge. Did she ask you to make that call go wrong? He said. The one she overheard. Dae-hyun did not flinch. No. But you knew she was in the hallway. The pause was 2 seconds long. In the context of Dae-hyun's typical response architecture, 2 seconds was a confession. I knew she had come home early, he said. Min-jae felt something move through him that started cold and arrived somewhere beyond hot, something that had no clean name in any language. You knew she was there when I made that call. I knew there was a possibility she would hear it. Dae-hyun's voice remained level. The levelness itself was an act of courage or an act of insanity. Min-jae wasn't yet sure which. I did not engineer what you said on that call. Those were your words and your fears and your failures, but the timing, he stopped. The young pressure that year was existential. If you had married her, formally, publicly, the exposure vectors would have stopped. Min-jae's voice came out with an edge that made Dae-hyun stop immediately. You let her hear that call, and then you watched her leave, and you let me live 14 years believing she'd made a choice. You let me build... He pressed his hand flat on the table and leaned forward. Every decision I made after she left. Every wall I built. Every reason I told myself it didn't matter because she was gone and she'd chosen to go, all of that was built on something you constructed. You understand that. Dae-hyun held his gaze. I understand that. And the boys, 14 years of their lives. Yes. Say it, Min-jae said. His voice dropped very low. Say what you did. Dae-hyun breathed. I separated you from your family, he said, because I judged that the organization required it, and I was wrong. His voice, for the first time in 20 years, lost its flatness. Something underneath it surfaced. Not quite regret, but something adjacent to it that caused him to show. I was wrong, Min-jae. What I calculated correctly was the operational risk. What I failed to calculate was the cost. He held eye contact. I have thought about that cost for a long time. The kitchen was silent. Min-jae straightened. He picked his phone up from the table. He walked to the kitchen door. Min-jae? Dae-hyun's voice came from behind him. The Yeon situation. If you... We're done for today, Min-jae said. He did not turn around. Don't call me. Don't come to the office. Wait. He walked out of the house. He sat in his car for 6 minutes. Then he drove to Congressman's Walk. He was 40 minutes early. He sat on a bench near the pavilion and watched a father push a stroller along the path with the deliberate focus of a man performing a specific kind of care. And he thought about Dae-hyun in his kitchen, saying, I was wrong with the particular weight of a man who has been right about nearly everything for 20 years and knows exactly how much that wrongness cost. He thought about the call in 2010. His own words. A woman like her doesn't fit into what I'm building. He thought about the fact that those words were real, that Dae-hyun had not invented them, that whatever manipulation had surrounded the architecture of the moment, the words had come from his own mouth because some part of him had believed them, or had been afraid enough to act as though he believed them, which was operationally identical. He was still sitting on the bench when he heard footsteps on the path. He looked up. Zarya was walking toward him with both boys. She addressed them deliberately casual. The same instinct he'd noticed in himself this morning, the let me look like less than I am maneuver. Jaden was in a basketball shirt and shorts, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the slightly aggressive ease of a 17-year-old who had decided to be unbothered before he arrived and would maintain that performance under pressure. Malik was a step behind, slightly smaller, hands in the pockets of his joggers, watching the path, and then watching Min-jae, and then watching the path again. Zarya reached the pavilion first. She looked at Min-jae's face and something moved behind her eyes. She was reading him, and she was good at it, better than most. "You look terrible," she said quietly. "I talked to Dae-hyun," he said. Her body changed, a small, full-body shift, like something braced. "How much do you know?" "Everything, I think." He held her gaze. "We'll finish that conversation later, not now." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she nodded, once, and stepped aside, and the boys came forward. Jaden stopped 2 feet from Min-jae and looked at him with the direct, full-force attention of someone who has been waiting a long time for this specific moment and has rehearsed it and is now discovering that no rehearsal covers the actual thing. He was 17 and already nearly Min-jae's height. His eyes were Zarya's. The rest? The set of his jaw, the way he stood with his weight distributed forward, was something Min-jae recognized at a cellular level. "So," Jaden said. His voice was steadier than it probably felt. "You're him." "I'm him," Min-jae said. "You've been in Houston 9 years." "Yes." "And you didn't know about us." "I didn't know." Jaden's jaw moved. His eyes didn't leave Min-jae's face. "Mom said you didn't know. I believe her. I don't know if I believe you yet." He paused. "That's where we're starting." "That's fair," Min-jae said. "Start wherever you need to." Jaden looked at him for another long moment, doing his own reading, his own arithmetic. Then he took a breath. "I've got questions." "Ask them. All of them." "All of them." Jaden asked for 40 minutes. He asked without mercy and without performance. Real questions, precise and specific, the questions of a 17-year-old who had been carrying them for 2 years and had organized them by weight. Why had Min-jae said what he said on that call? What did it mean that he ran the kind of organization he ran? Was it dangerous? Was it going to come near them? What did he want from them now? What did he think he was owed? Min-jae answered everything. He did not soften the answers. He did not make himself better than he had been. He said, "I was afraid. And fear in a man like me looks like cruelty because I did not know how to be afraid and human at the same time." He said, "My organization is dangerous, and I will keep it away from you completely and without condition." He said, "I don't think I'm owed anything." He said, "I just want to know you, if you'll let me." Jaden listened to all of it with the intensity of someone building a verdict in real time. Then he said, "I'll think about it," and stepped back, and that was his answer for today, and Min-jae accepted it. Malik had been standing 3 feet to the left the entire time, and Min-jae had been aware of him the way you're aware of something that doesn't make noise precisely because of how much it's taking in. Now Malik stepped forward. He was smaller than his brother but held more density somehow. A concentrated quality, like a person who had decided early on that taking up more space than necessary was not efficient. He looked at Min-jae directly. "I only have one question," Malik said. His voice was low, steady, 15 years old and already sounding like someone older. "And I need you to think before you answer." "All right," Min-jae said. "If you find out that someone you trusted made a decision that cost you something you can never get back." Malik paused. His eyes were completely still. "What do you do to that person?" The pavilion was quiet. Jaden looked at his brother with an expression that said this was not a question he'd heard before. Zarya went very still. Min-jae looked at his younger son and understood, with a clarity that arrived without warning and settled in his chest like ballast, that this boy already knew, or suspected, or had the specific quality of intelligence that put things together before the information was complete, the same way Min-jae himself operated, and that Malik was asking him not about Dae-hyun, but about what kind of man Min-jae was at the level below all performance. Min-jae thought about Dae-hyun's kitchen, about the 2-second pause, about, "I was wrong." "I don't answer that question yet," Min-jae said carefully, "because I don't have all the information I need to answer it with integrity. And giving you an answer before I have all the information would be telling you what I think you want to hear instead of the truth." He held the boy's gaze. "The truth is going to take me a little more time." Malik looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, just once. The specific nod of someone who finds an answer acceptable not because it was satisfying, but because it was honest. Okay, Malik said, and stepped back. Zarya exhaled beside him, barely audible, a person releasing something they'd been holding. Minjay sat back down on the bench and looked at his two sons in the afternoon light of a Houston park, and felt the weight of every missed birthday and first word an ordinary Tuesday evening pressed down through him in a single compressed instant. The way structural damage sometimes arrives not as a collapse, but as a settling, quiet, irreversible, complete. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then Daehyun's name appeared in a text message. 4 words, no punctuation. They moved. Tonight. You. Minjay looked at the message. Then he looked at his sons. Then he looked at Zarya, who was watching his face with the attention of someone reading weather. I need 30 seconds, he said quietly. He walked 10 feet away and called Daehyun. Daehyun picked up on the first ring. His voice was completely flat. The operational flatness, the one that meant the situation was moving. The Yan family met with 2 members of the council this morning. 2 hours ago, they filed a formal challenge to your operational authority in the Eastern Corridor. It's not just the port access anymore. He paused. They framed it as a competency challenge. They're citing the engagement dissolution as evidence of compromised judgment. They have 6 council votes pending confirmation. But itu sakin amasimte. Minjay processed this in approximately 2 seconds. A competency challenge on the council was not a negotiation. It was a removal mechanism. 6 votes was a majority of the 11-member body. If confirmed, he would lose operational authority over every asset in the Eastern Corridor, which was 60% of his organizational infrastructure, within 30 days. When is the confirmation window, he said. 48 hours. Who are the 6? I have 4 confirmed, working on the other 2. And our position. You have 3 locked, possibly 4. Another pause. Minjay, to hold this, you need to be physically present at the council chamber tomorrow night. You need to make the case in person. If you don't appear, abstention is recorded as a vote against you, and the math becomes irreversible. Minjay looked back at the pavilion. At Malik sitting on the bench now beside Jaden, the 2 of them in low conversation, Zarya standing at the railing with her eyes on Minjay, and her expression doing the thing it did when she was computing options. 48 hours. He had 48 hours to prevent the controlled demolition of everything he'd spent 20 years building. And he was standing in a park where he had just watched his 15-year-old son ask him the most precise question anyone had asked him in 20 years, and the answer was still forming in him like something set in concrete that needed time to cure. And he could feel it setting, and he could feel everything else. The organization, the council, the Yon maneuver, pressing against it from the outside. I'll call you in an hour, he told Daehyun. He disconnected and walked back to the pavilion. Zarya was watching him with that specific quality of stillness she had, not passive, not waiting, but fully present in the way of someone who had learned to read approaching weather from a long distance. You have to go, she said. It was not a question. I have 48 hours to prevent something that would... He stopped. He looked at her directly. At Jaden, at Malik. I don't want to go. He had never said those words in that order before. He was aware of that. Jaden said nothing, but something shifted in his expression, almost imperceptible, the kind of shift that only someone watching closely would catch. Malik looked up from the bench. Go, he said, simply, factually. And then come back. Minjay looked at his younger son. Malik looked back at him with those steady, ancient eyes. Come back, Malik said again. And something in Minjay's chest, the structure he had built over 20 years out of control and silence, and the particular armor of a man who had decided not to need things, shifted on its foundation and did not shift back. He looked at Zarya. She looked at him. There's something else, he said quietly, about Daehyun, about the KM Jin account and how it started. I need to tell you before you hear it from somewhere else, and I need you to know that when I tell you, I'm going to be telling you something that may make you want to... Minjay, her voice was very quiet. I already know. He stopped. I knew something was structured around my business, she said. I didn't know who. But when you asked about the box last night, I understood you'd found the KM Jin link. She looked at him steadily. And I made some calls this morning, to a lawyer I trust, and she made some calls. A pause. I know it was Dae-hyun. How long have you known it was him? 3 hours. Her voice was controlled, and underneath the control was a temperature that was not coldness, but something hotter and more dangerous. The specific heat of a person who has had 3 hours to sit with a betrayal. He funded my business, Min-jae, for 14 years. Without my knowledge or consent, he made me financially dependent on a structure connected to your organization, without knowing it. She stopped. Without my sons knowing it. Min-jae looked at her. I built something I thought was mine, she said, and her voice, for the first time, cracked, just at the edge, just enough to let the pressure show. And I find out today that the foundation of it was someone else's money and someone else's decision. She pressed her lips together. I need you to understand what that feels like. I understand, he said. No. She shook her head, just once. You don't yet, but you're going to. Her eyes were dry and direct and completely uncompromising. Because when you've handled your 48 hours, and when you come back, we are going to sit down and we are going to build something that has no Dae-hyun in it, and no KM Jin, and no structures that either of us don't see clearly. And if you can't commit to that, I can commit to that. If you can't commit to that, she continued as if he hadn't spoken, then what happened today is as far as this goes, and the boys get to decide what kind of relationship they want with you independently, and I step back completely. She held his gaze with the force of someone who has arrived at a position through considerable cost and intends to hold it. Those are the terms. The afternoon light came through the pavilion roof in long strips. Jaden was watching his mother with an expression that was partly awe and partly something that looked like recognition, seeing her be exactly who she was, completely, and knowing it. Malik was watching Min-jae. Min-jae stood in a park in Houston at 3:47 in the afternoon with 48 hours to save his empire and his sons 10 feet away. And the woman he had never stopped loving laying out terms with the precision of someone who had earned the right to every word. And he understood, standing there, that the man who had walked into this park an hour ago, the one who had operated for 20 years on the principle that control was safety and distance was strength, could not walk out of it the same way. Because Malik had said, come back. And that was the first time in 20 years anyone had asked him to. He drove back to the Galleria office with both hands on the wheel and the air conditioning off because he needed the heat, needed something physical pressing against him while his mind worked. And Houston in July at 4 in the afternoon was happy to oblige. 96 degrees of airless, indifferent pressure that came through the open windows like a physical argument. 48 hours. He ran the numbers as he drove. 3 locked council votes, possibly 4. The Yeon family had 6 pending confirmation. The 11-member council operated on simple majority, which meant 7 votes ended it. If the Yeon bloc confirmed all 6 and peeled 1 more from the uncommitted or the soft-locked, Min-jae lost the Eastern Corridor. 60% of his operational infrastructure, 20 years of construction dismantled through parliamentary procedure. He pulled into the Galleria structure, parked, and sat with his hand still on the wheel. Malik had said, come back. He got out of the car. The office was empty when he arrived, except for 2 junior staff, who read his face correctly and found reasons to be elsewhere within 90 seconds. Min-jae stood at the window and called the first number on his mental list, a council member named Hwang Tae-soo, 61 years old, 3rd generation, who had known Min-jae's father and who had voted with Min-jae's bloc consistently for 11 years, on the basis of a shared operational philosophy and 2 significant favors that Min-jae had never collected on. He collected on them now. Hwang answered on the 3rd ring. I've been expecting your call. Then you know what I'm asking. I know what you're asking. A pause. The Yan proposal has merit, Min-jae. Operationally, the port access restructure is Hwang Si. He kept his voice even. I'm not calling to debate the operational merits of the Yan proposal. I'm calling to remind you that in 2019, when the Busan situation created exposure for your family's financial instruments, I spent considerable personal capital ensuring that exposure went nowhere. I did that without being asked and without condition. Silence. I'm asking now, Min-jae said. A longer silence. The confirmation window closes tomorrow night at 10. I know. You'll be at the chamber. I'll be there. Then you'll have my vote. Another pause. But Min-jae, come prepared. The Yeon representative is not coming to lose gracefully. Park Sung-jin is going to be there personally. Park Sung-jin. The Yeon family's primary strategist, a man who had built 3 successful competency challenges in other jurisdictions, and who operated with the particular precision of someone who prepared for every counter-argument before the argument was made. Min-jae had encountered him twice at regional gatherings and had assessed him correctly as the most structurally dangerous person the Yeon operation employed. I know who's coming, Min-jae said. He made 4 more calls in the next hour. 2 went as expected. Favorable, conditional, confirmed. 1 was a refusal, polite and final, from a council member who had clearly already committed to the Yeon bloc and was not going to revise that commitment regardless of what Min-jae offered. The 4th call was to a man named Lim Do-won, who controlled 2 votes through a proxy arrangement and who was, by reputation, available to the highest or most compelling offer. Lim picked up and said, before Min-jae could speak, I've heard from both sides today. Then you know the situation. I know you ended your engagement to the Shin daughter in front of witnesses. I know the Yeon family has been preparing this challenge for at minimum 3 months, which means they were building toward this before you gave them the opening. A pause. Which makes me wonder what they would have used if you hadn't given them one. Min-jae straightened. That was an interesting framing. What did they offer you? A seat at the Eastern Corridor table, post-transition. Lim's voice was unhurried. The offer was financial, but framed as structural inclusion, long-term. I can match the financial component. I assumed you could. Lim paused. What I'm more interested in is whether you're going to be at that table in 6 months, because the Yeon proposal is built on the premise that you're distracted, compromised by personal situation. And I'm looking at the last 72 hours and He stopped. I'm not certain they're wrong. Min-jae was quiet for 3 seconds. 3. I'm going to be at that table, he said, in 6 months and in 6 years. And I'm going to be there having made decisions I can stand behind, which is more than I can say for the men building competency challenges on the back of someone else's personal grief. He heard his own voice land somewhere harder than he'd intended, and did not soften it. That's not a financial argument, Lim. That's a character argument. You decide which one matters more to you. Lim was quiet for a moment. I'll be at the chamber tomorrow night, he said finally. Make your case in person. Not a commitment, but not a refusal. Min-jae set the phone down. He sat at the table in the Galleria office and looked at the wall and thought about Park Sung-jin and the prepared counterarguments and the 40 hours remaining in the confirmation window, and then he thought about Zarya saying, I built something I thought was mine, with that crack at the edge of her voice. And he thought about Dae-hyun's 2-second pause, and he thought about Malik. Come back. He opened his laptop and began writing. Not a strategy document, not operational notes. He wrote for 40 minutes, longhand in the legal pad, the way his father had written, working through a problem on paper because the physical act of writing organized things that stayed tangled in the mind. He wrote out every lie the last 72 hours had required him to confront. Not other people's lies. His. The ones he'd told himself about why the empire was enough. About what strength looked like. About why a man in his position could not afford the specific vulnerabilities that came with loving people correctly. He wrote until his hand cramped. Then he picked up his phone and called Dae-hyun. Dae-hyun answered immediately. I need you at the council chamber tomorrow, Min-jae said. 10 o'clock. Not as my representative, as a witness. A pause. A witness to what? To the full account of the KM Jin arrangement. I'm going to disclose it voluntarily to the council before the Yeon bloc can use it as supplementary evidence of compromised judgment. He kept his voice level. If they have it, and they may have it, because they've been building this for 3 months, I need to have already owned it before they deploy it. That requires you to confirm it. Silence on the line. You're asking me to stand in the chamber and confirm what I did, Dae-hyun said. Yes, that will damage my standing in the organization permanently. I know. A long pause. And if I refuse? Then I go in without it, and we manage the exposure differently. Min-jae paused. But Dae-hyun, after what you've told me this morning, after 20 years, he stopped, chose the next words carefully. I need to know if you're willing to stand behind it, all of it, what you did and why, in the open. The silence lasted 11 seconds. I'll be there, Dae-hyun said. Min-jae ended the call. He spent the rest of the evening preparing. He did not sleep much. He ate something functional and tasteless at 9 o'clock and sat at the table with his notes until midnight. And then he drove home and lay in his bed in the dark and ran through the chamber arguments with the methodical focus of a man who had nothing left to lose that he wasn't already willing to lose. He thought about his father in the parking garage. Rainy Tuesday. The price of a life built entirely on power and nothing else. He fell asleep at 2. At 6 in the morning, a message arrived from an unknown number. 3 words. She found something. He called back immediately. The number was dead, disconnected. He sat up. He called Cha Bon-soo. Cha picked up, groggy and irritated. It's 6 in the... Someone messaged me about a woman. Possibly Zaria Bennett. I need surveillance on her property. Passive, nothing that creates a footprint. Min-jae, I'm not a... Please, Cha. The word stopped Cha mid-sentence. Min-jae did not say please. Cha knew this. All right, Cha said in a different voice. Give me an hour. At 7:40, Cha called back. There was a vehicle, Cha said, parked on the street outside the Bennett property last night. 2 men. They were there from approximately 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. The vehicle is registered to a logistics company in Pasadena that... A pause. That I've seen before in Yon-adjacent infrastructure documentation. Min-jae's jaw set. They had found her. In the 3 months they'd been building this challenge, the Yon family had mapped Min-jae's vulnerabilities. All of them. The engagement, the personal situation, and now Zaria. Not as a target, not yet. As leverage. The kind of leverage you positioned before you needed to deploy it, so that when the moment came, it was already in place. Put 2 people on the property, Min-jae said. People I trust, not Dae-hyun's network. Yours. Tell them passive observation only, Vao. No contact with the family, nothing that would alarm her. And if that vehicle comes back, I'll call you immediately. Don't call me, go. He ended the call and stood in his bedroom in the early morning light with his shirt still on from the night before, and his hands and the particular cold focus that settled into him when something important required immediate precision. He was not afraid. Fear was not the right word for it. It was something more total than fear. A full-body clarity that happened when the thing you were protecting stopped being abstract. He called Zaria. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was alert. She'd been awake. Min-jae, there may be a situation with your property. I need you to listen to me carefully. He heard her breath change. What kind of situation? People connected to a problem I'm managing may have identified your address. Last night they were watching it. They're gone now, but I have people in place. He kept his voice controlled and direct and gave her every word she needed without wrapping it in anything designed to soften it. I don't believe you or the boys are targets. I believe you're being positioned as leverage. There's a difference. Silence. Zaria, I heard you. Her voice was contained. How long? Until tomorrow night. After the chamber meeting, the leverage has no value to them regardless of outcome. It's a 24-hour window. And if I take the boys somewhere? That's entirely your decision, and I will support it operationally if you want. I don't want your operational support, she said. Not angry. Precise. The distinction mattered. I want to know if my sons are physically safe in this house tonight. Yes, he said. And he meant it with the totality of a man who had just arranged to make it true. I promise you that. A pause. I'm going to hold you to that, Min-jae. I know. Go do what you need to do, she said, and then we're going to have a very significant conversation about what comes next. She hung up. He dressed in the dark. Dark suit, no tie. He was not going to the council chamber looking like he was trying to impress anyone. He ate nothing. He drove to the Galleria, where Dae-hyun was already waiting outside the office door, which meant Dae-hyun had been there for some time, which meant Dae-hyun was doing the only thing left available to him that resembled making it right. They did not speak about the morning. They went through the case documents for 4 hours with the focused efficiency of two people who had done this kind of preparation many times and knew that the thing you missed in the run-through was the thing that killed you in the room. At 2 o'clock, Min Jae's phone rang. The screen said, Lim Do-won. He answered. I'm withdrawing from tomorrow night's session, Lim said. His voice was careful. I want you to know it's not directional. I'm not voting against you. I'm abstaining from the process entirely. Why? Because I received information an hour ago that I don't yet know what to do with, and I don't vote on situations I haven't fully assessed. A pause. The Yon family sent me documentation this morning regarding KM Jin Holdings and its connection to a woman named Zaria Bennett. Min Jae's jaw tightened. They had it. I see. They're framing it as undisclosed entanglement, using organizational resources to manage a personal situation covertly. Lim's voice was neutral, reporting. Min Jae, if this is what they're saying it is, the council won't need 6 votes to move against you. It'll be unanimous. It's not what they're saying it is, Min Jae said. The full account of KM Jin is going to be disclosed tonight by the responsible party under my direction. Whatever the Yon family has, the council will hear the complete truth from my side before any vote is cast. Silence. The responsible party, Lim repeated slowly. Seo Dae-hyun, Min Jae said. He'll be in the chamber. A very long pause. You're sacrificing your underboss. I'm presenting the full truth of a situation my underboss managed without my knowledge. The council can assess his culpability independently of mine. He kept his voice even. That's all I'm doing. Lim was quiet for nearly 10 seconds. I'll be there, he said. I'm not committing to a vote, but I'll be there. He ended the call. Dae-hyun had heard. He was sitting across the table with his hands flat on the surface and his face doing the controlled nothing expression. But underneath it, something had shifted. The specific expression of a man who has been waiting for a consequence and has now seen its exact shape. You knew they had the KM Jin documentation, Dae-hyun said. I suspected. And you told Lim that the disclosure tonight will cover it fully. Yes. Dae-hyun looked at the table. What I did, to you and to her, I'm not asking you to frame it as anything other than what it was. He looked up. When I stand in that chamber tonight, I will say what I did without minimizing it. You don't have to protect me from the council's response. I'm not protecting you, Min Jae said. I'm using the truth as a strategic instrument. Those are different things. He held Dae-hyun's gaze. But they arrive at the same outcome for you, so. Dae-hyun nodded once. They drove to the chamber separately. The council convened in a building in Midtown that officially housed a private law firm. The 7th floor was permanently reserved, permanently secured, and understood by the relevant people to be what it was. Min Jae arrived at 9:45. The room was already populated. 8 of the 11 council members present, 2 proxies for the absent members, and at the far end of the long table, Park Sung-jin. Park Sung-jin was 54, lean with the particular stillness of someone who had learned long ago that visible confidence was a resource to be conserved. He nodded at Min Jae when he entered with the fractional courtesy of a man who respects an opponent enough to acknowledge him before defeating him. Min Jae nodded back. He took his seat. Dae-hyun entered 30 seconds behind him and sat to his left without speaking. At 10 o'clock, the council chair, a man named Oh Hyun-suk, who was 70 years old and had chaired the body for 19 of them, called the session to order with the brevity of someone who does not view ceremony as necessary. The challenge to Min Jae's operational authority in the Eastern Corridor has been formally filed by the Yon family representation, Oh said. The session will hear from both parties before any vote is entered. Yon family representation will present first. Park Sung-jin stood. He was good. Min Jae had known he would be good, and he was structured, precise, building the case with the patient methodology of someone laying stone. He presented the engagement dissolution as evidence of compromised judgment under pressure. He presented the KM Jin documentation, which he did have fully, as evidence of organizational resources diverted to personal use without disclosure. He presented 3 months of circumstantial indicators that Min Jae's attention had been fractured by personal entanglement, and he presented the Yon proposal as a stabilizing alternative. He spoke for 22 minutes. He was very good. When he sat down, the room was weighted with the particular silence of people who have heard something compelling. Oh Hyun-suk looked at Min-jae. Response. Min-jae stood. He did not use notes. He had not used notes in a council session in 11 years because notes implied that you were uncertain of your own material. The KM Jin account, he said, was established and maintained by my underboss, Seo Dae-hyun, without my knowledge or authorization, for the purpose of providing financial support to a woman and family he had separated from me through deliberate interference in a personal matter 14 years ago. I was unaware of the account's existence until 48 hours ago. The room was absolutely still. Dae-hyun will confirm this account in full, Min-jae continued. The use of organizational infrastructure for this purpose was his decision, not mine, and the council may assess it accordingly. He looked around the table. At each face, at Lim Do-won near the end, at Park Sung-jin, whose carefully prepared expression had developed a fracture. The reason I'm disclosing this fully rather than managing it quietly is because the man across this table built a challenge on the premise that I lack the judgment to manage difficult truths. I want the council to see how I manage a difficult truth. He paused. The engagement to the Shin family ended because a woman I have loved for 20 years walked into a room with 2 sons I did not know I had. That is not compromised judgment. That is the most basic human accounting I have ever been asked to do, and I am not going to stand in this room and pretend it required less of me than it did. He kept his voice level. The room was so quiet he could hear the climate control running. What I will tell this council is that in the 48 hours since that moment, I have handled every operational matter with full competence, identified and contained a leverage play against my personal situation before it could be deployed against this organization, and disclosed voluntarily the single piece of information my opponents were going to use against me. That is my argument. He sat down. Dae-hyun stood and spoke for 8 minutes. He said what he had done. He said it without minimizing it, and without elaborating beyond what was necessary. He said that the decision to use KM Jin infrastructure had been his, and that Min-jae had been unaware. He said that his management of the personal situation had been unauthorized, and that the council should assess it as such. He sat down. The room was quiet for 3 seconds. Then Park Sung-jin said, from his seat, "The disclosure doesn't address the core competency question. The personal situation remains a structural vulnerability regardless of how the KM Jin account originated." "The personal situation," Min-jae said, not standing, just speaking, his voice carrying the room without effort, "is my son's. If you'd like to characterize my son's as a structural vulnerability, do that clearly and let the council hear the exact words." Park Sung-jin said nothing. The vote was called at 11:40. Min-jae sat with his hands flat on the table and his face holding the particular expression he had developed over 20 years for moments when the outcome was no longer fully within his control and the only remaining instrument was stillness. Oh Hyun-suk collected the votes. He counted them. He looked up. "The challenge fails to reach majority," he said. 6 votes required, 5 confirmed. The Eastern Corridor Authority is maintained. 5. The Yeon bloc had held 5, not 6. Lim Do-won had voted with Min-jae. The room exhaled. Park Sung-jin collected his documents from the table with the contained composure of a professional who had lost and was not going to perform about it. He stood. He looked at Min-jae across the length of the table with an expression that contained several things, most of them unspoken, the clearest of which was, "This is not finished." Min-jae looked back at him. "Mr. Park," Min-jae said quietly, "tell the Yeon family that the vehicle outside 4417 Memorial Crest Drive has been noted. Tell them that if it returns, I will consider it a formal escalation and respond accordingly." He held Park's gaze. "And tell them that the Eastern Corridor is not a negotiation I intend to have again." Park Sung-jin looked at him for a long moment. Then he left. The chamber emptied in stages. Dae-hyun sat at his left without speaking, which was the correct response to a situation that had no good words available yet. Min-jae sat until the room was nearly empty, and then he stood and walked to the window and looked at Midtown Houston at midnight. The same electrical fire from 44 floors lower, the same indifferent sprawl, the same city that didn't care about any of this. His phone vibrated. Chabonsu. "Vehicle returned at 11:15. We made contact. They won't be back." Min-jae typed back. Thank you. He stared at the city. He had 5 council votes and a maintained corridor, and an organization that was bruised but structurally intact. He had lost his underboss. Daehyun's position after tonight's disclosure was untenable, and they both knew it, and that accounting would happen, but not tonight. He had 5 votes and intact infrastructure, and the Yan family knew now what it cost to come directly at him. He had all of that. And what he was looking at through the window was not any of it. He was looking at the direction of Memorial Drive. He typed a message to Zarya. It's done. Everyone is safe. I'll call you tomorrow. He stared at the sent message for a moment. Then he typed, Malik was right. I came back. He put the phone in his pocket. Daehyun appeared at his shoulder. The final time, Min-jae understood that he would stand at this shoulder in this configuration. Something that had lasted 20 years was ending in this room tonight, and both of them knew it well enough that neither of them needed to say it. You held it, Daehyun said. We held it. A silence that contained 20 years in it. What happens now, Daehyun said. Not to the question of the organization, to something else. To the larger accounting. Min-jae looked at the city. I go home, he said, and then I go to her. He paused. And I figure out how to be something I've never been. Which is? Min-jae was quiet for a moment. Present, he said. He walked to the elevator. Behind him, in the empty council chamber, Seo Dae-hyun stood at the window alone and looked at the same city and said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say that the night hadn't already. He slept 4 hours and woke before dawn. Not from a nightmare. From the specific silence of a man whose mind had finished processing something enormous and had arrived, without ceremony, at the other side of it. He lay in the dark of his apartment with the ceiling above him and the city breathing its low electrical hum through the windows, and he did not reach for his phone. He did not run the numbers on the council situation or draft the language for Daehyun's transition or map the next 3 months of operational recalibration. He lay in the dark and breathed and let the silence be what it was. At 5:40, he got up, showered, made coffee, and sat at his kitchen table. He did not call Zarya at 6 in the morning. He had told her tomorrow, and tomorrow meant a reasonable hour, and he was going to behave like a man who understood that her time was not organized around his needs. He sat with his coffee and the early light coming gray and slow through the east-facing windows, and he thought about what Malik had asked him in the park. What do you do to that person? He had told the boy he needed more time to answer with integrity. He had the time now.
The honest answer. The one he'd been constructing since Dae-hyun's kitchen, since the council chamber, since the long drive home through a midnight city that didn't know or care what had just been decided, was this. You hold them accountable in the way that costs you both something real, and then you decide whether what remains between you is worth the architecture of something new. You do not destroy them because destruction is easy and requires nothing of you. You do not forgive instantly because instant forgiveness is a performance for an audience and costs the other person nothing. You find the specific middle distance that is harder than either extreme, and you stand in it, and you make them stand in it with you, and you see what's left. That was the answer. It was not a satisfying answer in the way that clean answers are satisfying, but it was true. He called Daehyun at 8. Daehyun answered immediately, which meant he had also not slept much, which was appropriate. I want your formal resignation from the underboss position by end of week, Min-jae said. I want it framed as a voluntary transition for personal reasons, nothing that creates additional instability in the organization. Understood. I want you to have full transition support. I'm not cutting you off without resources or references within the network. What you did was wrong and it caused real damage and you're going to live with that, but I'm not going to leave you without footing. He paused. That's not mercy. That's just, I'm not my worst impulse. Daehyun was quiet for a moment. No, he said. You're not. Another pause. Who takes the position? Kim Jae-won. He's ready and he's clean, and he doesn't have 14 years of complicated history with my personal life. He's young. So were you once. Min-jae set his coffee cup down. Dae-hyun. Sir.
The thing you said in your kitchen, that you were wrong. He kept his voice level. I need you to say it to her. Not to me. To Zarya. Directly. In person. If she'll allow it. Whatever she decides to do with that is her business. But you owe her the words from your own mouth, not filtered through me. A very long silence. Yes, Dae-hyun said. I know. I'll ask her if she's willing. He picked up the coffee cup again. That's all I have for now. He ended the call. At 9:30, he called Zarya. She answered on the first ring, which told him she had been waiting, which she would not appreciate him noting. The boys slept fine, she said before he could speak. Nothing happened at the house. Your people outside were discreet enough that I didn't have to explain anything to Jaden, which I want you to understand I'm not grateful for in the larger sense, only in the immediate practical one. I understand the distinction. Good. A pause. The sound of her kitchen, something on the stove, the low morning movement of a house with people in it. How did it go? We held the corridor, 5 votes. The challenge failed. And Dae-hyun. Resignation by end of week. He disclosed everything in the chamber. He stood up and said what he did and didn't minimize it. Min-jae paused. That doesn't make it right. But it's what happened. Zarya was quiet for a moment. I know what he did cost him. It should cost him something. Yes, it should. Her voice was careful, measured. The voice of a woman who has been deciding something overnight and has arrived at a position she's going to hold. Min-jae, I need to see you today, not on the phone. There are things that need to be said in a room. Tell me where. Here, she said. My house. Noon. A pause. The boys will be home. He understood what that meant. Not a private conversation, a family one, or the beginning of one. I'll be there at noon. He arrived at 11:58. The house in Memorial was a wide, single-story brick building set back from the street behind a low iron gate. Not the fortress architecture of a man trying to demonstrate power, but the deliberate quiet of a woman who had decided that her home was going to feel like a home. The garden was green and slightly overrun in the way of gardens that are loved rather than managed. A basketball hoop in the driveway. 2 pairs of sneakers by the front door, one enormous and one merely large. Min-jae sat in his car for 1 minute. Then he got out and rang the bell. Zarya opened the door herself. She was in jeans and a loose shirt, and her feet were bare, and her hair was pulled back practically, and she looked like a person in her own home on a Saturday morning, which was exactly what she was. And something about the ordinary reality of it, the specific, unremarkable domesticity of her at her own front door, hit Min-jae with more force than anything the council chamber had produced. She looked at his face. You look like someone who slept 4 hours. I slept 4 hours. Come in. The house was warm in the way that houses are warm when people actually live in them. Not temperature, but presence. Bookshelves with books that had been read. Photographs on the walls, the boys at various ages. Zarya in what looked like a business conference. A woman Min-jae didn't recognize who might be a sister or a cousin. A kitchen table with school papers on one end and a fruit bowl on the other. The kind of table where things happened. Jaden was on the couch with his phone. He looked up when Min-jae came in and gave him the assessment look. The one that was not hostile, but was not warm. The look of someone maintaining an evaluative position. Hey, Min-jae said. You won last night. Mom told us. I did. Jaden looked at him for another moment. Cool. He went back to his phone, which Min-jae understood as the highest available endorsement from a 17-year-old who was not ready to give more than that yet, and which was exactly enough. Malik came out of the hallway. He was in a gray shirt and sweatpants, hair slightly unkempt, the comfortable disorder of a teenager on a day without obligations. He looked at Min-jae and something moved across his face. Not surprise, because Malik did not seem to experience surprise as other people did. More like confirmation. Like he had expected Min-jae to be standing in this hallway, and was noting that the expectation had been correct. You came back, Malik said. I came back, Min-jae said. Malik nodded once. Then he went to the refrigerator and took out a carton of orange juice and poured 2 glasses and set one on the kitchen counter near where Min-jae was standing. It was the most precise gesture of provisional welcome Min-jae had ever witnessed. He picked up the glass. Zarya watched all of this from her position near the stove with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously and showing almost none of them. Sit down, she said. They sat at the kitchen table, Min-jae across from Zarya, Malik sideways at the end with his juice, Jaden migrating from the couch after approximately 90 seconds of pretending he wasn't interested, which was its own kind of honesty. Zarya set her hands flat on the table. I want to say some things, she said, and I want all four of us in the room when I say them, because I'm done having conversations in pieces. She looked at Min-jae directly. 14 years ago, I heard a conversation I should have asked you about directly instead of running. I was 25 and I was hurt, and I was terrified of what the pregnancy meant in the context of what I'd heard, and I made a decision that I thought was protecting myself and protecting them. She glanced briefly at the boys and back to Min-jae. I was not entirely wrong, but I also was not entirely right. And I've spent a long time being very certain about my version of what happened, and the last week has complicated that certainty. Min-jae said nothing. I'm not forgiving Dae-hyun, she said. I want to be clear about that. What he did, funding my business without my knowledge, making me financially connected to your world without my consent, that's a violation I'm going to need considerable time to process. I'm going to have to restructure the business, audit everything, establish what was genuinely mine and what was structurally compromised. Her jaw set. That's going to take months, and it's going to be painful and expensive, and I'm going to do it. I'll cover any costs associated with the restructure, Min-jae said. That's the organization's responsibility. I know you will. She held his gaze. And I'm accepting that because it's not charity. It's a debt. There's a difference. Yes, he said. There is. She looked at him for a moment, then, he called me this morning. Dae-hyun. Min-jae had not known that. He kept his face still. He asked if I would speak with him in person. I said I needed time to decide. She looked at the table. I'm going to say yes eventually, not for him, because I need to hear it from the person who actually made the decision, and because I've spent 14 years being angry at the right people for the wrong reasons, and the wrong people for the right reasons, and I am done carrying things that belong to someone else. She looked up. That's not absolution. That's just, I'm tired of it, the weight of it. Jaden, who had been quiet for several minutes, said, What did he say? When he called. Zarya looked at her older son. He said he was sorry, that he had made a decision that wasn't his to make, and that it had hurt people he had not adequately considered. She paused. He said he thought he was protecting the organization, and that he had been wrong about what protection meant. Jaden processed this with the particular intensity he brought to everything. That's not enough. No, Zarya agreed, it's not, but it's a start. Jaden looked at Min-jae. What happens to him? He's leaving his position, Min-jae said. That's already decided. That's it? In my world, Jaden, that is not a small thing. He held the boy's gaze evenly. It's the end of 20 years. It's everything he built. And he'll carry what he did for the rest of his life, which is the part that doesn't have a clean resolution. He paused. I can't give you a neater answer than that. Some things don't resolve neatly. Jaden looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly. Adjusting. The look of a 17-year-old revising his map of how the world worked, and not entirely happy about the revision because it was more complicated than the previous version. Okay, Jaden said. It was a different okay than yesterday's. More considered, more weighted. Malik had been watching all of this from his end of the table with the quiet totality that was simply how he existed in a room. Now he looked at Minji with those steady, ancient eyes. What happens to us? He said, specifically. The table was quiet. Minjae looked at his younger son. He thought about the legal pad in the Galleria office, about the answer he'd been constructing for 36 hours. He thought about his father in the parking garage and the empty seat at every dinner he could remember, and the empire that had been enormous and echoing and entirely insufficient. That depends on what you want, he said. Both of you, all of you. He looked at Zarya and then back at Malik. I'm not coming in here with a plan. I don't have a structure for this. What I have is time, and I have the willingness to show up, and I have the understanding that I am starting from the bottom of something and there is no shortcut through it. He paused. I missed 15 years. I'm not going to pretend I didn't, and I'm not going to try to compress what I missed into some accelerated timeline that makes me feel better. I want to be here, in whatever form that takes. On your timeline, not mine. Malik looked at him. Every week? Malik said. Every week, Min-jae said. Dinners? If you'll have me. Not every dinner, Jaden said from across the table. Not hostiles. Calibrating. Setting terms the way his mother set terms. Some dinners. Some dinners, Min-jae agreed. And you tell us the truth, Jaden continued, about your work, about what's dangerous and what isn't. We're not little kids. He looked at his mother briefly. We've handled the truth. We can handle more of it. Zarya said nothing, which was permission. Yes, Min-jae said. The truth. Age-appropriate, but not sanitized. You're right. You've earned more than a sanitized version. Jaden looked at him for a long time. Then he said, I want to meet my grandmother. Min-jae blinked. Of everything he had prepared for in the preceding 36 hours, that specific sentence had not appeared. My mother. You have one, right? She's in Sugarland. She is. He stared at his son. How do you know that? Jaden's expression did something that was almost a smile. I Googled you 6 months ago. There's a community newsletter that mentioned her. She's in a Korean cultural organization. He shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a teenager who has been planning something and is now deploying it. I want to meet her. Min-jae thought about his mother and her 17 opinions, and the myeokguk she'd said she was making on Sunday, and the way she had said, bring whatever you need to bring, with the particular tired wisdom of a woman who had seen a great deal and had stopped pretending she hadn't. Sunday, he said. She's already expecting me. I'll ask her if I can bring guests. She'll say yes, Malik said. Min-jae looked at him. How do you know? Malik looked back with those impossible eyes. Because you're her son, he said simply, and we're your sons. She's been waiting for this longer than you have. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the Houston morning pressed its heat against the windows. Late July, full summer, the kind of day that had no interest in being anything other than what it was. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the back of the house, a fan turned. The ordinary machinery of a home in the middle of an ordinary Saturday. Zarya looked at Min-jae across the table. He looked back at her. There was no clean resolution in her face. No signal that the 14 years had been set aside or that the particular damage done by a hallway conversation in a Chicago apartment had been absorbed without cost. She was not performing forgiveness. She was doing something harder and more real, which was sitting in the same room with the person who had, in one way or another, shaped the last 14 years of her life, and deciding to let that person stay. Coffee, she said. It was the most ordinary word she could have chosen. It landed like everything. Yes, he said. She got up and went to the coffee maker, and Jaden went back to his phone, and Malik refilled his own orange juice, and the table had the particular quality of a moment that is not the end of anything, but the beginning of something that doesn't have a name yet. Something that will need to be built slowly and carefully and without shortcuts, the way the best things are built. 3 weeks later, Min-jae drove to Sugarland on a Sunday morning with a box of his mother's favorite tea in the passenger seat, and a text from Jaden sent at 7:47 a.m. that said only, "What time are we leaving?" He had called his mother the week before and said, "I need to bring some people on Sunday." She had been quiet for exactly 3 seconds, and then she had said, "I'll make enough for 5," and hung up. When he arrived at her apartment building, Zarya's car was already in the lot. She had driven separately, her decision and the right one, because arriving together implied a definition of what this was that none of them were ready to commit to in formal terms. But she had arrived. That was what mattered. He found them all in the lobby, Zarya standing with her arms crossed in the particular posture she adopted when she was managing being in an unfamiliar situation with composure. Jaden, with his phone in his hand, looking at the building directory with genuine curiosity. Malik standing slightly apart, studying the framed photographs of the building's Korean cultural calendar on the wall. Min-jae walked in. Jaden looked up. "You're 4 minutes late." "I know. Just saying." "I know." Malik turned from this calendar.
He looked at Min-jae with the careful measurement that Min-jae had come to understand was not suspicion, but attention. The particular attention of a person who had decided that the world rewarded people who watched it closely. He had made that decision young, probably alone, in the specific loneliness of being a child who sees more than the adults around him expect. Min-jae knew the decision intimately. He had made it himself, at approximately the same age, in approximately the same loneliness. He nodded at Malik. Malik nodded back. They went up to the 4th floor. His mother opened the door before he knocked, which meant she had been watching the lobby camera on her phone, which was something she would deny if asked. She was 71 years old and 4 inches shorter than she'd been at 60, and she had the specific vitality of a small woman who had outlasted several categories of expectation. She looked at Min-jae first, the standard assessment, the one that had not changed since he was 9, and then her eyes moved to the boys. She went very still, not surprised. Malik had been right. She had been waiting, but seeing a thing you've been waiting for is different from expecting it. Her face moved through several things in rapid succession, each of which she controlled before it became visible. But Min-jae knew her face, and he saw all of them. She said in Korean, "Come inside, I made too much food." The apartment smelled of myeok-guk and rice, and the particular layered warmth of a home that had been cooking since early morning. She had set the table for 5 with the specific care of a woman who understood that table setting was a form of argument. The argument that said, "You belong here, I prepared for you, this space was made with you in mind." Jaden looked at the table and then at Min-jae. "What's that?" He pointed at the myeok-guk. "Seaweed soup," Min-jae said. "She makes it for important days." "What kind of important days?" "Birthdays," his mother said, in English, from the kitchen. She was not looking at them. "And the days that should have been." The table went quiet. Then Malik picked up his spoon and looked at Min-jae's mother with those steady eyes and said, "Thank you for cooking for us." She came out of the kitchen and looked at Malik for a long moment. "You have his eyes," she said, "when he was young, before he learned to close them." She touched Malik's shoulder briefly, light, deliberate, and went back to the kitchen without another word. Malik looked at Min-jae. Min-jae looked at his son. "Is that a good thing?" Malik asked quietly. "Yes," Min-jae said. "That's a very good thing." They ate. The meal lasted 2 hours. It was not entirely comfortable. There were silences that had weight, moments when the 14 years made themselves felt in the particular awkwardness of people navigating a history they did not all share equally. Jaden asked his grandmother questions with the directness he brought to everything, and she answered with the tartness of a woman who respected directness and had no patience for its opposite. Zarya and his mother spoke to each other with the careful mutual assessment of 2 women who were both deciding what they thought without saying so yet, which was its own form of respect. Malik ate and watched and said things at precise intervals that suggested he had been listening to everything, including the silences, which was accurate. Toward the end of the meal, his mother refilled the soup bowls without being asked and sat back down and looked at Min-jae across the table with the look she'd given him since childhood. The one that said, "I see you, all of you, every part, and I am not finished with my assessment." "You look different," she said. "I'm the same." "No." She shook her head. "You're lighter. You were carrying something for a long time and you put it down." She looked at Zarya briefly, then at the boys, then back at Min-jae. "It shows." Min-jae said nothing. "Your father," she said, and she rarely mentioned him, rarely opened that door, but she opened it now, in this company, deliberately. Spent his whole life carrying the organization like it was the only thing that needed carrying. He forgot to carry the other things, the things that don't make noise when you drop them. She picked up her tea. "You forgot too, for a while." "I know," Min-jae said. "You remembered," she said, and that was all. She drank her tea. Across the table, Jaden was watching this exchange with the intensity he gave everything. And when it ended, he looked at Min-jae and something in his face had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way he would have acknowledged if asked, but visibly. The specific shift of a young man revising his understanding of what a father is, which is a revision that takes time and cannot be forced, and which this moment was simply one small contribution toward.
After the meal, his mother took Jaden into the kitchen to show him something about the soup, which Min-jae recognized as a maneuver designed to give the room a different configuration. Malik drifted to the window. The Sugarland street below was quiet. Sunday afternoon, the specific stillness of a residential neighborhood between its active hours. Zarya stood near the table, her hands wrapped around the last of her tea. Min-jae came to stand beside her, not close enough to be a declaration, close enough to be honest. "I need to ask you something," he said quietly. She looked at him, not about arrangements or timelines or terms. He kept his voice low. I need to ask you directly. Because I've spent 20 years not asking people things directly when it mattered, and I'm done with that." He looked at her steadily. "Do you think we get somewhere? The two of us. Not immediately. Not without... I know what it costs, and I'm not minimizing that. I'm asking if you think there's a direction here." Zarya was quiet for a long time. She looked at her tea, at the window where Malik was standing, at the kitchen where the sound of his mother explaining something to Jaden came through in Korean and English, and the rhythm of a woman who was already, apparently, becoming a grandmother, whether anyone had formally arranged it or not. She looked at Min-jae. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said. "That's not a no." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He looked at her. She looked at him. Between them, in the specific silence of two people who have said everything necessary for now, and know it, something settled. Not resolution. Resolution was too clean and too final for what this was. Something more durable. The particular settling of ground after long movement, the way land feels different after it has shifted and come to rest in the new position. Malik turned from the window. He looked at his parents standing side by side for the first time in his conscious memory, in his grandmother's apartment in the quiet middle of an ordinary Sunday. He said nothing. He came back to the table and sat down and poured himself more orange juice from the carton his grandmother had put out, because she had apparently been informed by Min-jae's prior visit that this was a preference, and he drank it. From the kitchen, Jaden's voice, "Wait, you put the seaweed in first, or..." His grandmother's response, firm and slightly affronted. "You put it in first, always first. Why would you put it in last?" "I'm just asking. In 20 years you'll make this soup, and you'll remember I told you first." A pause. "Okay," Jaden said. Quieter. "Okay." Min-jae sat down at the table. Malik looked at him across the rim of his juice glass with the steady, ancient, 15-year-old eyes. "She's going to teach him the whole thing," Malik said. "She's going to make him write it down." "Probably," Min-jae said. "Is that okay with you?" Min-jae looked at his son, at the question underneath the question, the real one, the one Malik had been working toward since a park bench and a pavilion and a glass of orange juice set on a kitchen counter as the smallest possible architecture of welcome. "Yes," Min-jae said. "That's okay with me." Malik nodded. Outside, the Houston afternoon continued its slow, indifferent business, the heat pressing down on Sugarland streets, the city sprawling in every direction it had always sprawled, the same electrical fire burning through the same summer dark it always burned through. Inside, the soup was being explained for the second time with increasing firmness, and a grandmother who had set a table for 5 and cooked since early morning was winning an argument about sequencing with a 17-year-old who did not yet know he was losing. And at the table, 2 people who had been separately carrying the same weight for 14 years sat in the same room and breathed the same air and did not say anything else because everything necessary had been said, and what remained was not words but time, ordinary, unremarkable, unglamorous time, the kind that does not announce itself and does not require witnesses, the kind that builds something, slowly, the kind that lasts. Fade out.